Okay, this is chapter 10, the Age of Jackson. This will only be in 2 sections for this chapter. Here's your vocabulary words. You should have gotten them today in class after your test. Okay, so I want you guys to open up your textbooks. Hopefully you have them with you. Go to page 192. Start skimming through chapter 10. Remember, you're looking at headings, subheadings, bold words, italicized words, the pictures, the captions, maps, everything that the textbook gives you. You're not actively reading the chapter. You are skimming, just like you would if you were flipping through a magazine, okay? Now, I want you to create a prediction statement about what you think this chapter is about. I predict that blank will lead to blank because blank. Try to fit this format. You can go ahead and pause the video while you do that. Okay, so these are your objectives pretty much for the whole chapter. You should be able to discuss the opposing viewpoints on federal intervention in the national economy, explain the significance and evaluate the wisdom of the Missouri Compromise, evaluate Jackson's dealings with the American Indians, and summarize the causes, course, and outcome of the nullification crisis. Okay, so section 1, cross currents. We've just gone through the era of good feelings. There's all these different these widespread currents of nationalism and sectionalism and democratization. So meaning nationalism, remember that, people are really proud of our country. We're feeling very kind of unified. The Star-Spangled Banner is written during the War of 1812. But then there's also this kind of rising tide of sectionalism where you're going to really start to see the North and the South. Already, we've had regional differences when you've looked at the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, but it's just going to keep growing, that difference between the North and the South, until it pretty much combusts with the Civil War. This whole period from the end of the War of 1812 until we get to the Civil War can be called the Age of Jackson. So now we're at peace. National pride is kind of at its height. We've added 6 additional states to the Union. Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, and Missouri. We have this rise of very young, energetic, capable leaders. Daniel Webster would be one of them, John Quincy Adams, John C. Calhoun, also Henry Clay. And at the heart of this spirit of nationalism is a concern for our economic strength and unity. So Henry Clay is going to, and he's from Kentucky, he is going to kind of propose this American system in order for us to have a strong economy. So the 3 parts of the American system are protective tariffs, internal improvements, and the renewal of the national bank. So we know that a tariff is a tax on imported goods. A protective tariff is a very, very high tariff, and it's designed to shield the nation's manufacturers from potentially fatal foreign competition. Okay, and then internal improvements are things we've talked about before. Internal improvements are things like roads and canals and building harbors, making it easier to trade and communicate. And then the renewal of the National Bank. Remember, the National Bank has a charter that only gives it a certain amount of years to exist. And so he says we need to continue with that National Bank. Okay, so because we weren't able to trade with Europe pretty much during the War of 1812, that's kind of spurred our own manufacturing over here. But now we're threatened by Europe. We don't want to have to compete with Europe in that way because it could crush our economy. So the Tariff of 1816 is passed, and that's our first protectionist legislation. It's our first protective tariff. It encourages some economic growth, mostly in manufacturing, but it discourages competition, which leads us to have higher consumer prices. So when you go out to buy, a t-shirt, it's going to cost you a lot more than it had prior to the Tariff of 1816. So because we're unable, because of this high tariff, to trade with Europe, it really hurts the South and New England. Not quite as bad as when we get to the Tariff of Abominations, but it's definitely not a positive tariff. Okay, so the first national bank charter was set to expire in 1811. There's some inflation that has happened because we have a lot of paper money circulating. So there's been a general increase in prices, and the value of the money isn't as high as it had been. And so the Republicans are going to support a charter for the second national bank in 1816 because we know that it can do all these good things. Kind of why Alexander Hamilton fought so hard for a national bank in the first place. It's going to provide uniform currency. We're not going to have different kinds of money in every single state. It's going to be a source of loans for people. They can open businesses or sustain their businesses, especially when we have high tariffs that might be affecting how successful your business is. If they need to, they can take a loan out. And it's also a depository for government revenue, so all those taxes have a place to go. Okay, the third part of the American system is the internal improvements. Like I said, it would be funding for roads, canals, harbor developments. But this is the least successful aspect of the American system because the states are going to fight with the federal government about, can the federal government really build a road through here? We don't think that's fair. Really, these things should be the jurisdiction of the state, left to the jurisdiction of the state. The only kind of good thing that comes from the internal improvements part of the American system is the national road, which will go from Baltimore all the way to Illinois eventually. Okay, so if we were in class, we would do a think, pair, share here, but I do want you to take some time to think about what is the meaning of a double-edged sword. Were protective tariffs a double-edged sword? How do they function that way? Why do you believe protective tariffs would become a problem between the North and the South? And we might have to come back to this question once you guys have gone through the whole section. Okay, sectionalism. And so these are a few things that are going to contribute to that rising tide I told you of sectionalism, with separation between North and South in the country. The prices of cotton in Liverpool are going to fall very dramatically, and this is going to cause the Panic of 1819. And that's going to hurt the South because the South is the area that's providing the cotton, growing the cotton, and sending it over to England, where England takes that cotton and manufactures it in the textile mills into, cloth, into textile. The South feels that the tariff of 1816 was completely aimed at them, so they're upset about that. They think that's not fair. Another thing that happens is that the National Bank has given a bunch of loans to people that were going to go out and buy Western lands, and then they kind of tighten up the money supply after that, and people aren't able to pay on their loans, so they default on their loans. So now they owe the bank, and so kind of things aren't looking good. It's kind of ugly. We get the Missouri Compromise. This happens in 1820. John Quincy Adams is going to say that this is the title page to a great tragic volume. And he's really right, because this is kind of where this is the beginnings of the Civil War here. This struggle over the expansion of the country and how far we're going to take slavery. So Missouri applies for statehood in 1818, and it wants to have slaves in the state of Missouri. But this will kind of put into the question the balance between slave and free states. And that's important because if we have more free states, when we vote in Congress, things are going to probably swing that way more in the favor of the free states, and the slave states aren't going to like that, and vice versa. So in 1820, we reach a compromise, and we allow Maine to enter as a free state, and Missouri as a slave state, so we keep the balance between free and slave states. Okay, democratization. This just means that democracy is really opening up. More people have the right to vote now during the age of Jackson. Before the age of Jackson, only white male property owners could vote. And now, pretty much suffrage has been extended to all white males, not just white males that own land. Now, it's kind of weird to think like, oh, democracy is flourishing when only white males can vote. Because now, if you're a citizen, you can vote. But this is a huge deal at this point in time, okay? Number 2, presidential electors are now chosen by popular votes. Remember we watched the video on the Electoral College. You saw how Each state has electors that then cast the vote for the people on who should be president. Before this point in time, the electors were chosen by the legislature, so the people didn't really have a say. And so the rules have changed where the people can choose who are their presidential electors. The third is the fracturing of the one-party system, and now we really have a strong two-party system, because remember during the era of good feelings, there really was only one party. And these two parties are pretty much the beginnings of the parties we have today. We have the National Republicans and the Democratic Party. Here's your paragraph strength. Democratization, nationalism, and sectionalism. SRQ review. What were the three components of Henry Clay's American system? You have protective tariffs, internal improvements, and the renewal of the National Bank. What was America's first protectionist legislation? The Tariff of 1816. And what were the three provisions of the Missouri Compromise? Allow Missouri to enter as a slave state, Maine to enter as a free state, and we will forbid slavery in the rest of the Louisiana Territory north of the 3630 boundary. You will have a quiz tomorrow. The bonus question answer will be expo markers, and your board games will be due December 18th. So be working on them. I want to see a lot of creativity, color, make your games fun, learn something while you're creating those games.